If you like RTS, then the chances are that you've heard the term Spring Engine before. Even if you haven't, there's a good chance you've looked at a few community-made games and wondered, why the hell do all these look like Total Annihilation? Well, it's time for some answers. Hi, I'm Kaluven, and today we're going to talk about the Spring Engine, where it came from, what happened along the way, and where it is today. You see, back in the before times, in the long ago, there was Total Annihilation. TA was awesome and beloved, but unfortunately abandoned when the cave dog that created it went the way of Old Yeller. However, as with many popular projects, there's often an active community of developers and enthusiasts who keep the dream alive with maps, mods and other custom additions. One such group came from a gaming clan called the Swedish Yankspankers, or simply SY for short. They were best known for a project called the TA Demo Recorder, which gave TA players a way to record their games, watch them back at a later date and share them with others. This was particularly useful, as the original TA had no such feature, and recording and uploading an hour-long video was not so common back in the early 2000s. Quite a lot of this history predates YouTube, which goes some way to explain how vital the work was, but also how difficult it can be to piece all these different bits of information together. Somewhere along the way, the talent at SY decided to use their considerable skills to try and bring Total Annihilation into the modern age. Gaming had come a long way since '97, and the original TA was riddled with limitations that no amount of tweaks or modding could overcome. In August 2004, a page arrived on the subdomain of their website with the first release of their new project entitled TA Spring. Their stated goals were to create a new RTS, firstly using content from the original TA, and then later evolving it into something new altogether. From what I can tell, it was actually a project in two parts that went hand in hand together. The first part was the engine, TA Spring, and the second was XTA, the game built on that engine. This was a particularly smart and generous way of doing things, as it let SY retain hold of their own game while still allowing them to release the engine under the GPL license for others to use. There would be a flurry of updates to their website over the next couple of years as new versions were released, until the site was discontinued and everything was moved over to GitHub. You've probably seen or heard of GitHub before, but I think it's worth explaining what that actually is to non-programmers. Git is a source control system that allows multiple developers to easily work on the same codebase. It lets you work on different versions of files and merge changes together in a way that makes collaborative projects not just possible, but also relatively painless. GitHub is a cloud-hosted place for these projects, so essentially GitHub is a hub for your Gits. Now you know. Anyway, over the years, development on both Spring Engine and XTA continued. Responsibilities changed many times as the original developer resigned from the project and new faces took over. And then those new faces later resigned and even fresher faces were introduced. Looking at the history in GitHub, XTA was still receiving changes all the way up until 2019, and TA Spring itself, since renamed just Spring Engine, was getting the odd tweak as recently as 2023. However, Spring hasn't had a new version released since 106 arrived in Jan 22, so I think it's probably safe to say that after almost 20 years, both projects have now reached their eventual conclusion. If we're being honest, I think it's probably fairer to say that the project really slowed down a few years earlier. There were some 30 major version releases between 2007 and the 10 years that followed, but only 4 or 5 since 2017. During its heyday, the Spring Engine would be the backbone of quite a few different types of games. Some of these never really got past the early stages of development, but others would get a bit further and have playable releases. These included some fan-made games based on existing IPs such as Star Wars Imperial Winter and Mech Commander Legacy, both dangerous territory in the modern day due to how litigious the owners of these properties can be. It also included a few legally safer ideas such as the World War II RTS Spring 1944 shown here, and Kernel Panic, a game based on a battle within a computer that can be best described as a cross between Tron and a fever dream. The Spring website goes on to list a few more that I'm less acquainted with, including The Cursed, Metal Factions, and Journey War. Aside from these more creative ideas, the Spring Engine was more often used for variations on its old namesake, those being new and improved versions of Total Annihilation. These include the original XTA that we mentioned earlier, as well as Absolute Annihilation, Tech Annihilation, TA Prime and Nota, or not original Total Annihilation. The most well known of these is probably Balanced Annihilation, a project that ran ever since 2016 and was still hosting tournaments as recently as this year, but it looks like their website's been down for some time and development might have dried up somewhere around 2019. The final version of BA is pretty impressive. It looks reasonably modern and does a solid job of recreating the original look and feel of TA. The Spring engine and the games created on it never really caught on outside of a small circle of die-hard TA fans and those more directly involved in the community. A few of the games often appear on various lists of free RTS games, but as far as the general game-playing public goes, they aren't something that ever really gained any traction. As far as I can tell, I think there's three main reasons for this, but before I go into them, I think it's worth highlighting what a remarkable achievement the Spring engine is. It takes a lot of talented people a great deal of time to develop a game engine, and the fact that it's all been done for the sheer love of real-time strategy games is a true credit to the dedication and the skill of everyone involved. None of these people received a single penny for all of their hard work, but all of them sunk hours of their valuable time into the project, not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of the community as a whole. These days, such a project would probably be rammed full of donation buttons, Kickstarters, early access releases and Patreons. But from the original SY team onto everyone else who joined and left over the years, they did it out of love and creativity. They have my utmost respect, and even though I doubt any of them are ever watching this, I would like to convey a big thank you to each and every one of them. So, now we've given credit where credit's due, what problems did Spring run into? Well, I think the first and most obvious one was the 2007 release of Supreme Commander. In most respects, this was a direct competitor to what most of the games on the Spring engine were trying to achieve. Not only that, it was a project headed by the creator of the original TA, along with the composer and other staff members. It was a huge public release preceded by a load of hype and press coverage, and it was a product of a professional game studio with a history of quality output. It wasn't exactly TA, but it was close enough for the subset of RTS fans that had been looking for a game in that style. It was also excellent, and is still regarded as the best large-scale RTS of all time. It set a pretty high bar that was impossible for a community project to reach. Sure, Supcom wasn't TA. If you loved TA and only TA, then it wasn't going to fill the spot. But the general strategy gamer wasn't looking for a modern remake of TA, they were looking for something cut from the same cloth that evolved the genre, and Supreme Commander did just that. Another shortcoming of a lot of the games on the Spring engine was the lack of a complete experience. Many of them put their sole focus onto multiplayer battles or skirmishes. Very few of them included a soundtrack, and even fewer made a stab at anything like a single player campaign. It's hard to overstate the importance of good single player content in a strategy game. It brings you into the universe, teaches you the controls and helps you to become invested. Most people will decide if they like an RTS solely based on the single player experience, and if you don't include one, then it's very difficult to win over potential converts or introduce new players to the game. This limits your audience to those who are already huge fans of the original game that yours is based on, and is almost guaranteed to inhibit much in the way of growth or large-scale adoption. This isn't a criticism specific to Spring engine games, but a problem with a lot of community-made projects, and even some professional ones. I think the final thing that the Spring engine struggled with was being a bit of a victim of its own generosity. You see, making the Spring project available to all was a very charitable and very respectable move, but unfortunately it had the result of splitting the community rather than uniting it. Whenever a developer or group of developers were unhappy with the general direction of one particular attempt to recreate TA, they would start their own project in an attempt to realise their own vision. Every time this happened, both the talent and the player pool was diluted, and any new entrants to the scene got split between the ever-growing list of available games. This resulted in no single one of them ever getting enough traction to break into the mainstream. And you have to wonder what they might have been able to achieve if they had all worked together. So, we've looked at a bit of history of the Spring engine and some of its games and a few of the problems, but where is the Spring engine today? Well, that's a difficult question. I've spent the last day trying to piece together more recent developments, and honestly, as an outsider, I'm a little bit lost. There are two modern projects worth playing, and they are both derivatives of the Spring engine and earlier Spring engine games. They both have a similar goal, to provide a modern RTS that, unlike all of their bedfellows, doesn't rely on the intellectual property of any previous studio release. This has always been the problem with games like Balanced Annihilation and its ilk. The models, the names and other work are all owned by someone else who, at any point during their history, could have issued a cease and desist letter and put the brakes on the whole thing. This might sound unlikely, as the company that originally created it is long dead, but all it takes is a sale of the rights to a more litigious organisation, and then plans for a new game to be drawn up and suddenly the letters start flying. So, let's deal with the simpler of our two stories first and talk about 0K. This is a Spring Engine game that started life as a fork of Balanced Annihilation named Complete Annihilation. It's an interesting deviation from the regular. For one thing, it flattened the tech trees and settled on a single combined faction, instead replacing variety with in-game choices and commander customizations. It genuinely feels very different from most of the other Spring Engine projects that came before it, as it has its own unique art style, gameplay and units. It's also got its own music, tutorial and single player campaign and a Steam release, so it really does actually feel like a proper game. It's also totally free, so if you enjoy games like Total Annihilation or Supreme Commander, then I think you'll probably like 0K and should head over to the Steam store and grab it whenever you get a chance. The second modern project is one that I've talked about a bit before on my channel, Beyond All Reason, or simply BAR. This is also a distant descendant of Balanced Annihilation, and knowing how the people at BAR are with naming, my guess is that BAR, or BAR, probably started out as an acronym for something like Balanced Annihilation Reloaded, or Redux, or Revisited. However, the history of BAR is a little more confusing as it seems to have a tad of drama behind it. What follows is my own interpretation from an outsider's point of view. I've done my best to read through what's available, but if I've totally misread the situation and you are in the know, then please correct me in the comments, as I don't want to spread misinformation. Anyway, at some point in recent history there was a disagreement that resulted in some sort of schism between various developers of the Spring Engine. The old guard of mostly inactive maintainers wanted to stay on course, while the new school, fronted by the BAR developers, wanted to take a different path. It's a shame when these sorts of things happen, but after trying to dig a little deeper, I get the impression that it may have been unavoidable. Spring Engine had been attempting to migrate to OpenGL4, a vastly improved way to handle graphics, ever since 2017. Unfortunately, interest in development had waned, and by 2020 there was only a single contributor still active, and he was struggling to complete the job. To make matters worse, none of the existing games could run his new branch, so he's unable to get any feedback on the work he's done. At about this time, Beyond All Reason appears, created on a different branch of the Spring Engine that has the new OpenGL4 improvements added, but in a backwardly compatible way. I think this is where most of the resentment started, but a year later there was an offer to merge this back into the main Spring Engine to reunite both projects. An olive branch, if you will. There you go, there's a Git joke for you. Unfortunately, this gesture was ignored. I don't know why. Maybe it was fatigue, maybe it was apathy, maybe it was spite, maybe a bit of all three. But after months of waiting, the people working at BAR lost patience, and they created a fork based on their work, which they called Recoil. The following year, one of the long-time maintainers of the Spring Engine decided to release the original but incomplete version of the OpenGL4 implementation as official version 106. This is widely regarded as a poor decision. It had little to no support and, as far as I can tell, wasn't used by a single Spring Engine game. Despite this, various individuals did try to promote reconciliation, but this failed, and after a while the whole thing descended to the level of forum bans, Discord kicks and petty wiki edits. By this point in time the damage was done. The maintainers of the official Spring Engine and the developers of Recoil want nothing to do with each other, and effectively there's now a permanent divide between the original but now stale Spring Engine and the new and actively developed Recoil. It's unfortunate that it went down this way, but it may be for the best in the long run. The new Recoil engine does seem to be popular, and it looks like some of the other Spring Engine games like 0K and Metal Factions have actually switched to it. I've played quite a lot of Beyond All Reason myself, and in my personal opinion, it stands head and shoulders over a lot of the other Spring-based games that I've tried. It's got great graphics, excellent performance and a lot of promise, and the whole experience is a testament to the skill and hard work of the developers of BAR, Recoil and the Spring Engine that came before it. So there you have it, the origins, twists and turns of the ever-evolving Spring Engine. Instead of my usual sign off, I'm going to run a list of all the project contributors that I could find, as I think they deserve some recognition. So, like, comment and subscribe and all of that good stuff, and I hope to see you back soon.